Sleep and metabolism, how rest restores energy, hormones, and recovery. Have you ever noticed how different everything feels after a poor night of sleep? Food choices feel harder, your patience feels thinner, energy dips earlier in the day. Even small stressors seem to carry more weight than they normally would. What's interesting is that when we experience those kinds of days, we often try to correct them with food, caffeine, or pushing ourselves a little harder. We adjust meals, we rethink workouts, we try to power through the fatigue. But very often, the real issue didn't begin that day at all. It began the night before. Sleep influences nearly every system in the body, but one of the places it has the strongest impact is metabolism. The way your body regulates energy, hunger, stress hormones, and recovery is deeply connected to the quality of rest it receives. Last week, we talked about stress and metabolic load, how the body begins shifting its priorities when pressure remains elevated for long periods of time. One of the primary ways your system actually recovers from that load is sleep. When sleep becomes inconsistent or disrupted, the body doesn't get the same opportunity to reset and repair. And that's what we're going to explore in this episode. Not sleep as a performance metric or something to optimize perfectly, but sleep as restoration. Because long before sleep affects productivity or mood, it quietly supports the deeper systems that regulate energy and resilience. Before we go further, a quick word of wisdom. I'm not your doctor, and this podcast isn't a substitute for professional medical advice. I'll share what the research says, what I've learned, and what might support you. But before making changes to your diet or health routine, always check in with a qualified healthcare provider or practitioner. Now let's talk about why sleep plays such an important role in metabolic recovery. Throughout the day, your body is constantly responding to demands. Work responsibilities, physical activity, mental focus, emotional stress, digestion, movement, and all of these require energy and coordination across multiple systems. Even when life feels manageable, your body is continually adjusting to what the day requires. Sleep is the period when many of those demands finally quiet down. During sleep, the body shifts its attention toward repair and recalibration. Hormones that regulate hunger and fullness begin to rebalance. Stress hormones gradually settle. Blood sugar regulation becomes more stable. The nervous system transitions out of a constant state of alertness and into a state that allows deeper recovery. This is why sleep affects so many things at once. When the body receives consistent rest, energy tends to feel steadier, recovery becomes more efficient, and the system is better able to tolerate normal variations in food, stress, and activity. In many ways, sleep restores the internal conditions that allow metabolism to function smoothly. When sleep becomes disrupted, that restoration process becomes less complete. The body may still function, but it has less opportunity to recalibrate fully. Stress hormones remain elevated longer. Hunger signals become slightly more reactive, and the system begins carrying more residual load into the next day. Most people have experienced this in very practical ways. After a poor night of sleep, hunger often increases earlier in the day. Cravings for quick energy tend to be stronger. Focus may feel less stable, and patience can feel shorter. None of these responses mean something is wrong with your metabolism. They simply reflect the body trying to compensate for incomplete recovery. Over time, when sleep disruption becomes consistent, that incomplete recovery can quietly influence how steady energy feels from day to day. The body is still working hard to maintain balance, but it's doing so with less time to reset. This is one reason sleep becomes so important during midlife. As the body becomes more sensitive to cumulative load, stress, responsibility, hormonal shifts, and daily demands, the recovery that sleep provides becomes even more valuable. Sleep isn't simply rest. It's the body's primary opportunity to restore stability after the demands of a day. One of the reasons sleep matters so much is that its effects show up almost immediately in everyday life. None of the changes we feel are dramatic on their own, but together they shift how the body experiences the day. The body is remarkably capable of adapting to short-term disruption, and one difficult night of sleep rarely causes lasting problems. But when sleep becomes inconsistent over longer periods of time, the body begins carrying that extra load forward. Instead of starting the day fully restored, it begins each morning slightly behind. Over time, this can influence how steady energy feels throughout the day. Hunger patterns may become less predictable. Recovery from exercise may take longer. Even mood and stress tolerance can feel less stable. None of this means the body is failing. It simply means the system hasn't had the opportunity to complete the recovery process it depends on. This is one reason protecting sleep becomes so important when life becomes busy or demanding. When the body receives consistent restoration overnight, many of these daily fluctuations begin to settle naturally. Sleep quietly restores the conditions that allow metabolism to function with steadiness rather than constant correction. Another reason sleep becomes such an important part of metabolic recovery is that many women begin noticing changes in sleep during midlife. For some, sleep becomes lighter than it once was. Others notice they wake more easily during the night, or that falling back to sleep takes longer than it used to. Some experience early waking in the morning, even when they still feel tired. These changes can feel frustrating, especially for women who previously slept deeply and rarely had to think much about sleep at all. It's easy in those moments to assume something is wrong, but in many cases, what's happening is simply a shift in how the body regulates sleep. Hormonal changes during midlife influence the systems that help regulate circadian rhythms, temperature, and stress hormones. Estrogen and progesterone both play roles in how the nervous system settles at night. And as those levels fluctuate, sleep can become more sensitive to stress, schedule changes, and environmental disruptions. At the same time, many women in midlife are carrying a different kind of daily load than they did earlier in life. Responsibilities at work may be greater. Family dynamics may be shifting. Aging parents, growing children, and career demands often overlap during these years. Even when life feels meaningful and fulfilling, it can still place steady demands on the nervous system. All of that influences how easily the body settles into a deep recovery at night. What's important to understand is that sleep itself has not disappeared. The body still knows how to rest and restore. What often changes is that sleep becomes more responsive to the overall environment. When the day carries more pressure or stimulation, the nervous system may take longer to fully settle. This is why sleep often improves when small rhythms are protected. Consistent bedtimes, a quieter evening routine, reduced stimulation late in the day, and gentle wind-down practices can make a surprising difference over time. None of these shifts need to be rigid or perfect. They simply help signal to the body that the day is slowing down and that recovery can begin. And when the body receives consistent signals of safety and rhythm, sleep often begins to deepen again. That deeper recovery is one of the ways metabolic stability gradually returns. Once you begin to see how closely sleep and metabolic recovery are connected, the next question naturally becomes practical. How do you actually support better sleep in the middle of real life? For many women, evenings are the most compressed part of the day. Work may extend later than expected. Household responsibilities continue. There may still be emails to answer, people to care for, or tasks that feel difficult to postpone. By the time the day finally slows down, the mind may still be carrying the momentum of everything that came before. In that kind of environment, sleep doesn't always come easily. One of the most helpful shifts is not thinking about sleep as something that begins the moment your head touches the pillow. In reality, sleep begins much earlier than that. It begins with how the body transitions out of the activity and stimulation of the day. Small signals can help that transition happen more smoothly. Dimming lights in the evening, reducing screen exposure late at night, or allowing a brief period of quiet before bed can help the nervous system begin to settle. Even when something as simple as stepping away from work earlier in the evening or protecting a consistent bedtime window can make a meaningful difference over time. None of these practices need to be strict or perfectly executed. The body responds far more to patterns than to occasional exceptions. What matters most is giving your system consistent cues that the day is winding down and that recovery is safe to begin. Nutrition can also quietly support sleep rhythms. Eating balanced meals throughout the day helps stabilize blood sugar, which reduces the likelihood of nighttime wakefulness caused by energy fluctuations. For some people, gentle nutritional support in the evening can also help the body settle more easily. If you're curious about that, I've linked a few foundational supplements I trust in my Fullscript storefront. But even more important than any specific strategy is the overall posture toward rest. When evenings are approached with the same urgency and pressure as the rest of the day, the body often struggles to shift into recovery mode. Allowing even a small margin for quiet at the end of the day can signal to your system that the demands have eased and that restoration can begin. Over time, those rhythms help the body to relearn what it feels like to settle into deeper rest. And when sleep becomes more restorative again, the benefits often extend far beyond the night itself. Energy stabilizes more easily, recovery improves, the system begins to feel less reactive and more resilient during the day. Sleep quietly restores the margin the body needs to function well. There's also a deeper perspective woven into this conversation about sleep and recovery. Scripture consistently reminds us that human beings were never designed to live in a constant state of output. From the beginning of creation, the Bible presents life unfolding in rhythm. In Genesis, the pattern of creation is described as evening and morning, day after day. Activity is followed by rest. Work is followed by restoration. The cadence itself communicates something about design. That rhythm continues throughout Scripture. When God established Sabbath for his people, it wasn't simply a rule about religious observance. It was a reminder that human beings have limits and that life cannot be sustained by effort alone. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 10 says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God." Rest was built into the structure of life because restoration is necessary for human flourishing. Sleep reflects that same design in a very quiet way. Every night, the body releases the demands of the day and enters a period of renewal that we cannot force through effort or discipline. In fact, sleep requires the opposite posture. It requires surrender. It asks us to step away from productivity, stop solving problems, and allow restoration to occur while we are no longer actively managing things. Psalm 127, verse 2 captures this beautifully. "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." That verse doesn't dismiss hard work or responsibility. Instead, it gently reminds us that constant striving is not what ultimately sustains us. Restoration is part of God's provision. Jesus echoes that same invitation in Matthew 11:28 when he says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Rest is not presented as weakness or indulgence. It is presented as relief for a system that has been carrying more than it was designed to hold alone. In many ways, sleep is one of the most basic ways we live within that rhythm. Every night we practice releasing control. We stop producing, we stop striving, and we trust that restoration will happen while we are no longer actively working. That posture can feel unfamiliar in a culture that often celebrates constant productivity. Many of us have learned to push through fatigue, extend our days, and treat rest as something we negotiate after everything else is finished. But the body rarely responds well to that approach over time. Just as Sabbath reminds us that we are not sustained by our effort alone, sleep quietly reinforces that truth every single day. When we allow space for restoration, we are not stepping away from responsibility. We are participating in the rhythm God designed for human life. And when the body receives the rest it was created for, many of the systems that regulate energy, metabolism, and resilience begin to stabilize again. Protecting rest is not simply a healthy strategy, it is wisdom. As we wrap up this conversation, the most important idea to carry with you is actually very simple. Sleep is not just rest, it's restoration. Throughout the day, your body is constantly responding to demands. physical effort, mental focus, emotional stress, digestion, movement, responsibilities, and the countless small adjustments that keep everything functioning. Sleep is the time when many of those systems finally have the opportunity to reset. When sleep becomes more consistent and restorative, the body begins recovering more completely from the stress and metabolic load it carries during the day. Energy becomes steadier, hunger signals feel more predictable, recovery improves. The system simply has more margin to work with. And that's often where meaningful progress begins, not by pushing harder, optimizing more aggressively, or adding more strategies, but by allowing the body the recovery it needs in order to function well again. If you've been noticing that your energy feels differently lately, or that recovery takes longer than it used to, sleep may be one of the most supportive places to begin. Small rhythms, protecting a bedtime window, and allowing the evening to quiet down, reducing stimulation late in the day, can gradually help the body settle into deeper restoration again. Sometimes supports can help reinforce those rhythms as well. If you're curious about that, I've linked the supplement brands that I personally use and trust in my Fullscript storefront. They're simply tools that can support the foundations we've been talking about through this series. Next week, we're going to continue building on this conversation by looking at another layer that supports metabolic health: movement. I've done an earlier podcast that we talked about movement. We talked about movement as medicine, but in the next episode, we'll explore how movement integrates into metabolic recovery in a way that supports energy rather than exhausting it. When sleep, nourishment, and movement begin working together, the body becomes much more capable of maintaining steady energy and resilience over time. But for now, focus on restoration. Sometimes the most powerful step toward better health is allowing the body the space to recover. So until next time, friend, stay nourished, stay steady, and choose wellness, one thoughtful step at a time.